You're watching a special edition of WPTV To The Point.
Senator, let's move on and talk stimulus money here. As chairman of the Senate Committee on Small Businesses and Entrepreneurship, you spearheaded that bipartisan effort to create the Paycheck Protection Program. It sounded wonderful, but so many of your constituents were incredibly frustrated by the application process for getting the stimulus money. Then ultimately they stood in line. They were told no initially, then they were told, okay, you've been green lighted. And then they ultimately were denied when they watched the money run out. So Kathy from Port St. Lucie wrote this in. She said, get another round of PPP funding going, and this time put checks in place so big businesses can't use loopholes to suck up all the money first. She said, what were you guys thinking? Allowing big chains to break it up by location. Your response?
Well, a couple points. Number one is that everyone agreed that we wanted this program to reach more than just the traditional small business. That's why we added 1099 gig economy employees. That's why we added not-for-profits. And it was a broad bipartisan belief that certain industries like restaurants and hotels, because many of them are owned, they're not owned by the big chain. In essence, it's an individual owner. It may say Hyatt outside, but it's an individual owner. One person or a family that owns a hotel shouldn't be knocked out because the company name is Hyatt. I think, unfortunately, what's happened here is that the way it was applied through regulations opened the door for some companies to get it that was not what we intended in terms of the regulations and the application of it. Second, it is important to understand that in 11 days, they made 14 years worth of loans. This was a bill that was put together very quickly in an emergency situation. We did the best we could. It was then implemented over 6 days. And in 11, 12 days, it made 14 years worth of loans. 1.6 million businesses got it. The average loan was less than $200,000 or about $240,000. That's not a big business. That's 2.5 months of payroll that equals $240,000 is not a large company. The 60% of the loans, 75% of the loans were under $150,000. That's not a big company in terms of 2.5 months worth of payroll, but it was not a perfect plan. And when you implement something quickly, that's the case. As far as more money, I agree. We've been asking for more money before we even passed the bill. I told everybody it wasn't going to be enough. We tried to get more money 10 days ago. It was blocked and taken hostage because the Democrats wanted some additional things. And I'm hopeful that in this new tranche of money that we'll be able to protect, for example, 50% of the new money, $50 billion of the new money is going to go to some of the smaller banks. The community banks have stepped up and done a great job. They've been 60% of the loans, 70% of the loans, but the vast and overwhelming majority of them. So there are ways to improve the program. But ultimately, the goal is not to, this doesn't bail out any company. It gets money into the hands of workers.
Right. And so let me ask you about that. I mean, business owners at the end of the day were sitting down on Sunday night at their dining room tables in this state. And if they made it through the month of April, Senator, they are staring down the month of May. They're not going to be able to make rent, much less payroll. So what is it with this next round of PPP when we see it come through is going to be tweaked and changed so that small business owners in Florida are not standing at the end of the line?
Well, a couple things. Number one is the first part of it was this was at the lender level, right? So this money is not coming from the government. The cash is coming out of the deposits of the banks. So the banks have to take the application, fill it out, get it approved, and then disperse the money. And every bank had a different approach.
Okay.
Some community banks moved very quickly.
Right.
Some of the bigger banks took a week to even start. So we can't force banks to provide these loans. All we can do is incentivize them through the fee they make to come into it. Second, it was new for them. Up until April 3rd of this year, no bank in America had ever made a PPP loan, and the SBA had never processed one. This was a brand new thing. So I think they're going to get better at doing it. Number three is the backlog. Just the sheer volume was overwhelming. It's one of the things I've argued about. While we wait for Congress to appropriate more money, which should have never run out and which we should not have delayed in approving, let's use this time wisely by beginning to process those applications pending, more funding, so we don't get hit with 800,000 applications as soon as it reopens, because it's going to create the same backlog and the same glut. So there's a lot of different things here, but in many cases, everybody has to understand it's not money that's coming directly from the federal government. It is banks that have to step up and process it. And frankly, some have been much better than others. There have been some small banks around here that have done hundreds of these very quickly, and there's some of the bigger banks that took forever to start on the program.
A record number of people in Florida filing for unemployment, but most cannot get it. Still ahead, Senator Rubio talks about a suggestion from a viewer to delay mortgages, car, and credit card payments.